Good morning, everyone. We're continuing our roadmap for right living based on the 52 qualities of Swami's book, Affirmations for Self-Healing. Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence living in our hearts, guiding our thoughts, enlivening our feelings, that we may live in this world in constant remembrance that we are on a divine mission as your instruments to be channels for love, for joy, for divine power. Show us the way to live in harmony with your will. Om, peace. Amen. All right, my friends, we are now on quality number 4, which is energy. So for a while, I'm going to be able to sort of repeat like a litany where we've been. We started with success. We went to love. We've been through happiness. And now quality number 4 for our roadmap for right living is energy. So we have the Swami, in this case, wrote just 2 paragraphs. I'll read them all the way through, and then we'll start taking it apart word by word. Energy is ours, not when we hoard our strength, but when we devote it willingly, joyously, toward the attainment of that in which we deeply believe. Faith and energy go hand in hand. If you have deep faith in what you are doing, you can move mountains. Energy is always highest when one's cause is just. The greater one's faith, the greater his willpower. And the greater his willpower, the greater his flow of energy. Oh my, this is going to be fun, isn't it? So, there are 8 manifestations of the divine according to the classical philosophy of Sanatana Dharma. The concept of those 8 manifestations are fundamental to being able to live in attunement with the divine. In a sense, those 8 manifestations alone are the roadmap to right living. But since I've attached that title to these 52 qualities, I'm not going to go back there. But I would highly recommend, if you're interested, if you go on my YouTube channel and type in 8 manifestations, it's well worth looking at. The 8 manifestations of the divine are love, joy, peace, calmness, wisdom, energy, light, and sound. Now, energy, the order of it doesn't matter. I just use my fingers to make sure I don't miss one. Energy is often described as power, but energy, for my mind, is an easier way to understand what is meant by the power of God. So when we're here talking now, in this, love is one of the 8 manifestations, happiness, joy is one of the 8, and energy is one of the 8, which is, we say we want to live in tune with God, we want to be God's instrument in this world, we want to be channels for the divine. The 8 manifestations tell us fundamentally, what that energy looks like when it manifests in this world. Otherwise, it's just an abstraction. What divine consciousness looks like manifested in the world. The 52 qualities here basically take those 8 manifestations and bring them more into very specific things that we can access as human beings. This is part of the genius of Swami Kriyananda as a spiritual teacher, is that he was able to take the overarching ideas that Master brought. Master had access to the totality of Sanatana Dharma, the totality of the self-realization approach to life. Master selected from the ancient teachings and all these generations and generations of building up rituals and understandings and philosophies and practices. He picked out of that those specific attitudes and ways of understanding which would take us into Dwapara Yuga, that would take us out of Kali, out of the form and the rituals and all of that, and into Dwapara Yuga. And then he, as Swami often described him, like a comet streaking across the sky, Master laid down an energy trail. Swamiji played the role, which he's played in multiple incarnations for Master. He comes as the next generation, literally as a physical son or as a spiritual son. And then he takes those ideas and even pulls them down more specifically. You know, the word success, and later on we get into words like generosity, kindness, service, which are all, you can start with the 8 manifestations and then you can pull those specific words down. How would it manifest as kindness? Well, that obviously comes out of the word love, but it also has to be tempered by wisdom, because kindness offered when kindness is not going to help the situation, and of course I'm getting very subtle in this, but the 8 manifestations all work together, and then the specifics have to be in balance. So now we're working with just the pure concept of energy, which would be power, which is to say, just the force moving through the world to make things happen. Energy is absolutely fundamental, dynamic energy, directed by willpower, guided by wisdom, tempered by love, all of these different things together. This is fundamental to right living, since that's how we're talking about this, the roadmap to right living. Swamiji has often commented that sometimes people appear to be good, which is to say that they behave in a way that doesn't violate anybody's moral or social standards. He said, but they're not really good in their consciousness, and I love how Swami puts it. They just don't have enough energy to sin. And so you're not good because you're too lazy to put out the energy to be bad. To be truly good means that it has become your nature to understand where happiness comes from and what causes suffering. And that all choices are available to you, but you have made a decision as to what choice you will actually do. Master said in one of his whispers, I believe it is, he said, it is not sufficient to be good merely because it's your habit to be good, which I thought was a very interesting way to put it. You're just habituated to doing the right thing, but it's not like it's become your consciousness to do so. This is something that I learned about Swamiji over the course of time, which was very interesting to me, because he behaved well. And I behaved pretty well. Not really well, but I behaved pretty well. But so I knew what it was to sort of make a decision that this is the better choice and I'll make this choice. My energy is pushing me in 2 different directions, but I'm going to choose this one because I understand from the concept of wisdom that this would be the right choice. With Swamiji, I came to realize it was a very, very different, the impetus behind what he was doing was very different. And it came clear to me in a specific example, which was, I met Swami when I was 22. He was 44 when I met him. He had been a disciple since he was 22. He was a teacher in his own right. He was founding Ananda. He'd lived in India. I mean, all these different things. He had been vice president of Self-Realization Fellowship. All these different things were already part of his reality. I was, perhaps the word arrogant twerp is the right words to apply to me. I was deeply sincere, and I wasn't impossible, but I was a pretty arrogant twerp. And I never hesitated to express my opinions. And I had completely unreasonable commitment to my own ideas. I was just young. I was a callow youth. And all the time, Swamiji always treated me with tremendous respect. He always made me feel as if I was a valued member of the team whose opinion really mattered. And it wasn't a courtesy he just extended to me. He just extended it to everyone. In my book, Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him, there's a very touching story. This woman talks about how, I think it was her first weekend visiting Ananda, or when she was, at least when she was very new. No, I think she was already resident. So she was very new, but she had very little experience. And as circumstance would have it, Swami had been away from Ananda village at that time. And then he came back, and there was a very small gathering of people he knew well in the living room of Crystal Hermitage. And for various reasons, she ended up being part of that group. And she said she was just amazed that Swami just treated her the same as he treated everyone else. He solicited her opinion. He listened carefully when she spoke. He responded honestly but respectfully to what she said. And it was just like there was no difference because that's the way he was. So, time, flash forward, decades pass, I end up being responsible for a community. I'm now in a position where I'm dealing with people who are 20 plus years younger than me and have correspondingly less experience, and looking in the mirror, have a lot of confidence in themselves, because Ananda tends to attract magnetic, intelligent leader types. That's who we attract, fortunately, thank you, God. So I'm now sitting in either one-on-one conversations or in meetings in which people who have had less experience than I and are chronologically less developed than I am, and they have very strong opinions, and sometimes they contradict mine. And I like my own ideas. That's, to a certain extent, one of my weaknesses as a leader, is that I like my own ideas a little too much. And so, the thought would cross my mind, I don't have to listen to you. You don't know what you're talking about. But I would realize, no, I can't do that. Swami raised me differently, and it made it possible for me to develop. I have to offer that same opportunity to others. And, so I would work with it, more or less successfully, depending on the day of the week or the issue at hand. So later, I had the opportunity, after this had begun to integrate into my mind, and I really began to reflect how, and this is what I ended up saying to Swamiji the next time I had the chance to speak to him. I said, Swamiji, I just want to thank you in all the years that we worked together up until that moment, because, of course, he remained 22 years older than me the whole time. I said, you never once referred to my youth or my inexperience, ever. And that's not hyperbole. He never did. And he just accepted the compliment in the spirit in which I offered it. But I could tell from the way he responded that I was still missing the point somehow. And so after he accepted the compliment, just let that sit for a minute, he said, in reference to my being so much younger than him, he said, I never noticed. I mean, that's very simple. I never noticed. What do you mean you never noticed? It's like somebody's body, that's the most defining thing about them, isn't it? He said the physical age is completely meaningless. He said, I never see people in terms of their physical age. I just see them in terms of their consciousness. And a 4-year-old child could be more advanced than a 90-year-old person, because we just enter bodies and live through them, and enter bodies and live through them. And as I read it in the Gita commentary just recently, our spiritual development remains as an impression in the astral brain. That's how I believe it was put. So that when we come out of the astral world, we bring into our new physical body the samskars of whatever spiritual development we've attained up until that point. And we just start there. Of course we would. Otherwise, what a crazy system this would be. Who would ever get realized? You acquire like this. So I never noticed, he said. And then, of course, it crystallized what I had also known, but it really crystallized that Swamiji's way of living was a spontaneous response to his perception of reality. It wasn't a disciplined decision based on what he'd learned. Now, perhaps in his youth it was, I don't know. But I was a pretty good girl because I had acquired enough wisdom much of the time to make a disciplined decision based on what I'd come to learn. But there would always be a lot of steps in that. There would be a reaction, there would be an introspection about the reaction, there would be a decision about what was appropriate, there would be the necessary self-discipline to implement that right decision or not. And for Swami, he would just see it this way. It's like in the life of Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom was this wonderful, devoted Christian who was an elder woman, a middle-aged woman in World War II. She was a watchmaker in Holland. The Nazis came in and took over the country. Her sister Betsy, they were two spinsters and they lived with their father and ran this little watch shop. And when the Nazis started persecuting the Jews, they felt called by Jesus to protect the Jewish people, and they became, these most unlikely heroes and protected many, it became really a central underground station in the resistance there and saved many, many Jewish people, hid many people in their own home. Eventually they were betrayed and arrested and put into concentration camp. The father was killed almost immediately or died almost immediately. Betsy and Corrie lived for a number of years in a concentration camp. Eventually Betsy died and Corrie lived. And then Corrie spent the rest of her life proselytizing for Jesus and about the power of divine love. Toward the end of Betsy's life and toward the ends of their imprisonment, Betsy said to Corrie that, I'm going to die here, you're going to live, and you're going to have to tell people, and this is the most beautiful way she put it, that no matter how dark, no matter how deep the darkness, the love of Jesus is deeper still. And then Betsy said to Corrie, and they will believe you because you've been here. You've been in hell. And you realize that the love of Jesus is deeper still. And then Betsy told Corrie, all of which proved true, that they really needed to pray for all the people there in the camps and how much they were suffering and how much they needed to be helped. And Corrie assumed that Betsy was talking about their fellow prisoners, but suddenly she realized that Betsy was talking about the guards. She was talking about the prison guards and how hateful they were and the evil that they had perpetrated. But what Betsy was feeling was far more than the innocent victims. The perpetrators of the evil were the ones who need to be prayed for, because their transgression against divine law was much worse. And when the realization hit them, they would be in a much more terrible condition. And Betsy told Corrie that, in fact, Corrie would have rehabilitation homes for the Nazi guards, which is in fact exactly what she did. And to Corrie, it was like, how could I ever do that? But to Betsy, it was just self-evident. She just looked at these awful people torturing and being so cruel, and all she could think of is, you poor soul. You poor souls, what will become of you? This is, of course, she was imitating her master. Jesus Christ is on the cross being crucified. And the picture you always have is that he's slightly above ground, which he is because he had to be lifted off the ground in order to have his weight be on the cross. He couldn't be standing on the ground. And it's a hill, it was a hill, a steep hill. And so he's on the cross, he's looking at the people who crucified him, just looking right at them. And what comes out of him is this compassion for them, because this was not good karma to have crucified Jesus Christ. This was just like, from the point of view of creating long-term happiness and avoiding suffering, this was not a good action. This was going to create repercussions that would not be positive. And all that Jesus could feel was just great sympathy for the misery these poor people had created for themselves. And he prayed out loud so that he could be heard. He prayed to the Heavenly Father, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. These poor souls acted without knowledge. So what Jesus was actually doing, which is just remarkable to think of, he was interceding. He was trying to take the karma. Because they'd set this energy in motion, Jesus was trying to take that karma on himself. This was the redemptive act of sacrificing his human body and allowing all that negativity to run through his body as pain and humiliation that led to death. And of course, he was sacrificing for his disciples, but he was also sacrificing for his self-styled enemies. That wasn't an act of disciplined will. That was a perception. That was just the perception of what he saw. So, coming here to what's written here, he says, energy is ours not when we hoard our strength, but when we devote it willingly, joyously, and this is the part that I want to speak of, and that I have been speaking of, toward the attainment of that in which we deeply believe. So Swamiji is not just talking about, using your energy to attain worldly success, to bend people to your will, to beat your competitors, whatever you might think of, to have power over other people. This is the misuse of your energy. He's talking here as energy, well, actually, all energy is divine. All energy is a manifestation of the divine. But when we temper it with the other manifestations, such as love, peace, wisdom, that's the kind of energy that's how we should use our energy. So, toward the attainment of that in which we deeply believe. So now we have to ask ourselves, what is worth giving our energy to? My dilemma when I was growing up, until first I found self-realization at the age of 19 and then met Swami at 22, the dilemma was not solved until I met Swami. I had a lot of energy. I was born with a certain number of talents, primarily with words. That's always been my ability. And with a lot of energy. I was always energetic, and I was healthy and energetic. But the terrible dilemma I faced was, what can I do with this that is worth doing? It was an abstract idea, like that would be genuinely helpful to the planet, that would genuinely serve people, and the other that would give personal meaning to my life. And I thought of it in terms of the end of the road. Because of yogic practice in the past, I didn't know, I couldn't name the systematic way I thought about life. But in retrospect, when I finally got the words for what I was doing, when I finally realized that these were universal concepts, I could look all the way back to my earliest memories and realize I was always the same. I always had these principles as my natural way of thinking. I just didn't know what they were. My family trained me up, my parents trained me up with a very strong moral compass and a very strong sense of ethics and truth and honesty. But it wasn't enough. It was the yamas and the niyamas were very clearly expressed in my childhood, and all three of the children in my family we all have the same, just we can't violate it. When my parents were elderly, and I wanted them to end their lives feeling they'd done a good job in their lives, because it was true. I remember writing to them about how well raised we had been, and I mentioned specifically that, not one of your 3 children can even drop a gum wrapper on the street. I mean, just like we couldn't even litter. It just wasn't in us. Even to this day, if I accidentally drop a little piece of paper, I have to stop and go back and pick it up. I don't know what they did, but I can't leave it there. this strength was there. But I also had the vairagya of a yogi. And I couldn't see building a castle on sand. I just couldn't see it. All the options that were given to me just seemed, why would I do that? Why would I spend a whole lifetime developing that? Yeah, I would do a little good, but it wasn't enough. I decided actually that I would raise children. Of course, that implies you have a husband. At least in the generation I grew up, you would have had a husband. And of course, the husband wasn't there. But nonetheless, I would raise children because to me, it looked like the one thing that I could do where I could make a positive contribution that would not be corrupted by other people's values. It was a little naive, but it wasn't unrealistic. So that was basically my thought. The fact that I never had children for many years totally surprised me. But at least it was meaningful. In other words, I could give my energy willingly and joyously toward the attainment of that in which I deeply believed. Just to finish the saying, but when I found out that self-realization was really what I wanted, it still left me with the practical dilemma. So now I know that self-realization is the goal, but still couldn't find how to devote my energy to it. I wasn't a hermit by temperament, and I wasn't a contemplative by temperament. I'm active, I'm a karma yogi. This is just basically my path, a bhakti and a karma yogi, and a raja yogi, because we all meditate. But to put me alone in a cave and just ask me to meditate, I knew it wouldn't work for me. Never even thought of it. It just wasn't my way. So I knew that, but the dilemma was worse, because now at least I knew where I was trying to go, but I had no idea how to get there. Then I met Swami Kriyananda. And in the first place, I saw it manifested. You see, this is the value of living examples. You read it in a book, you can't figure it out. Or you read it in a book and you know that Milarepa lived, in the cave in Tibet and had this extremely odd guru named Marpa who assigned him these terrible tasks. He had to build, dismantle, and rebuild a stone tower on a high hill. I believe it was 9 times, at the direction of Marpa, his guru. Whoa. First of all, Marpa's not around anymore, and I didn't know if I wanted to rebuild a stone tower 9 times. It was just like there were so many things. How do I actually do this in California in that time in the 60s? How do I do this? Then Swami Kriyananda walked into the room, and he was American, and he was outgoing, and he was dynamic, and he was laughing, and he was singing, and he was starting this community, and he spoke the same language I did without an accent. He talked about experiences that were very similar to mine. And all of a sudden, you see, this is why whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I'm quoting from the Gita, Krishna's words, I, the infinite spirit, take visible form. To restore Dharma, to drive the shadow away. Because in every age it's different. It has to be renewed. Not the truth, but the expression of it. That's all. In the Bible, Jesus uses what to us now are incredibly obscure images. He talks about new and old wineskins. Like, I don't really have a wineskin, and I don't know the difference between a new and an old one. He talks about sheaves of wheat. He talks about the wheat and the chaff. He talks about the goats. He talks about the sheep. And he wasn't trying to be esoteric or poetic. It's everybody he was talking to had wineskins, goats, sheep, and shafts of wheat. He was taking the teachings and bringing them down to a concrete expression that people could understand. Just like that. He talked about servants and their masters. Just all of these things that were very obvious. But we have to stretch to understand it. Master talked about radio and television and movies and airplanes. Jesus couldn't have talked about those things, even though he could have predicted them, seen them in the infinite. So it has to come down to something we ourselves understand. So when Swami walked into that room, I just understood. I could feel, oh, this is what it looks like to be in California and to be a self-realizationist. And then it was the beginning of what could I do with my energy? I could willingly and joyously give it to something I really believed in because it was exemplified in front of me exactly what that meant. Okay, my friends, God bless you.